The brutalist part of this film is having to stomach all of the colonialist whitewashing apologia. I promise this one's an actual review. The Brutalist is that one movie no one had heard of until it took home the Golden Globe for Best Drama. And with such arbitrary accolades at its heels, I was honor-bound to march down to my local multiplex for a showing the instant I was bored and had nothing to do. And boy howdy do I have ish with this one. I am trying to overcome my crippling addiction to burying leads, but since barely anyone's seen this one, I think it makes the most sense to go through a plot-by-plot synopsis, much to my chagrin. Then I'll give you my apolitical takes, and then we'll get into all the spicy ethnocentrism stuff after that. Sound good? Groovy. So, exposition! It's 1947. We open with a letter being read to our protag, Laszlo Thoth, in a VO written by his wife, Erzsébet, over a static reverse dolly of his niece, Zofia. Laszlo and his family are Hungarian Jewish Holocaust survivors. Laszlo got out on a boat to America, but Erzsébet and Zofia got stuck in Europe. Laszlo's plan is to make some scratch in the States and help the two to also immigrate. Plot proper! Immediately, the first thing Laszlo does after processing through Ellis Island is head to a local brothel where he partakes. Then Laszlo gets on a bus to Philly where he plans to crash with and work for his cousin Attila Miller. Attila is showing off his local furniture store and trad wife Audrey when he very pointedly tells Laszlo that he and Audrey are Catholic. Laszlo makes some truly horrendous furniture pieces for Attila's shop, which lets the film semi-organically info-dump about Laszlo's pre-Buchenwald life as a once-in-a-generation architect a la the Fountainhead's Howard Rourke. No, we are not doing that today. But thank you, I appreciate your gusto. Then there's a tiny time skip accompanied by a montage of Laszlo working, set to a radio snippet of the UN announcing the ratification of the Nation of Israel. One day, Attila gets commissioned by this uber-wealthy wasp named Harry Lee Van Buren to remodel his dad's library as a birthday present to him while he's out of town for a couple of days. Attila and Laszlo do a half-decent job if it weren't for Laz dragging one of his butt-ass ugly chairs into the room as a centerpiece, and the crew dropping and shattering a giant glass dome all over the front lawn. While cleaning the mess, rich dad Harrison Lee Van Buren comes home early and is nonplussed by the surprise extreme home makeover episode that he's unwittingly hosted. Harry's chewed out off-screen by his dad, stiffs Attila on the payment, which Attila then shifts blame for onto Laszlo, whom he also accuses of making a pass at Audrey, which Wikipedia calls a false accusation? Not how I interpreted all those longing eye gropings by the confirmed adulterer, but whatever. Either way, Laszlo gets kicked to the curb and the Millers are now out of the picture. Daddy Van Buren then tracks down Laszlo, now homeless, heroin-addicted, and shoveling coal for ends meet, apologizes for blowing up on him earlier, and says that he's since been so enchanted by Laszlo's work that he's not only come bearing the payment in full for the renovation, but is also hiring Laszlo for a new multi-million-dollar construction project on a wildly outlandish compound comprised of a grand library, a performing arts theater, a gymnasium, and a Christian chapel. Yada yada yada, complications ensue, but now that Laszlo is rubbing elbows with bigwigs, he's able to borrow the Van Buren's super expensive lawyer to expedite Erzsébet and Zofia's immigration process. But surprise, in the interim years since their separation, Erzsébet has contracted an extremely painful case of osteoporosis and is now wheelchair-bound as a result. Laszlo receives this news with the same love and devotion that he's shown to his wife thus far, which is to say, none whatsoever, but Erzsébet is weirdly cool with it anyway, and she also says that she found out about his infidelities via astral projection, and then also immediately and unpromptedly forgives him? Laszlo is still coldly cruel to his wife anyway, because she had the audacity to contract a disease. Blah, blah, blah. Laszlo gets fired and rehired onto the project, which time skips us to the Thoths living in New York, where Erzsébet has a job as a puff piece columnist that'll end up adding some friction and distance as we round into the third act, since Laszlo's compound is still back in PA. Oh, and Zofia, now married and pregnant, announces that she and her new family are moving to Jerusalem, very pointedly rationalizing the relocation as their obligation, and that they are going home. Back on the case, Laszlo and Van Buren go to Italy, where Van Buren does a very bad thing to Laszlo. Sometime later in New York, Erzsébet is suffering from an intense bout of pain due to osteoporosis, which Laszlo treats with a half syringe of heroin, and only now, in the throngs of a shared illicit opioid binge, can Laszlo show love to his wife once again. Aww. Only not aw, because Erzsébet ODs on the street drugs and gets hospitalized. Oh no! Only not oh no either, I guess. Because the next time we see Erzsébet, she's using a walker, presumably because she no longer needs the wheelchair. So, I don't know what that's all about. Anyhoodle, Erzsébet drops in unexpectedly on the Van Burens during dinner and calls out Harrison for that very bad thing he did. And Harrison, I think, literally vanishes into thin air? I don't know, put a pin in it. Laszlo and Erzsébet, now straight donezo with America, move to Jerusalem to be with Zofia and live happily ever after. The end. Epilogue. Super jump forward to 1980, where the now fully adult Zofia gives us a proto-TED Talk on why her uncle, the fictional architect, is the most spectacularist, goodest boy ever. And the actor who played the younger Zofia is now cast as her lineless adult daughter, and I know they hung a lampshade on it earlier with one of Erzsébet's 1,080-yard expository letters, but it is still the most distracting goddamn thing in the world. The end. For realsies. Most of the discourse around the Brutalist, that's not just furious tongue-bathing, has surrounded its interminable length. Not only is it a 3.5 hour long movie, but it has an honest-to-God, no-joke overture and intermission. The static screen overture being a laughably vestigial holdover from over a century ago when moving picture shows were barely more than a camera being pointed at a stage play. Its rolling live theater, serving as a buffer for ticket holders who showed up late to make it to their seats, has long since been replaced by movie theaters running a half hour of trailers at quoted curtain call time for their audience. Its other function, setting an emotional tone before really starting the story, has also been usurped in efficiency by the opening credit sequence, an already perilous and potentially immersion-breaking tool that I've seen scant few feature films use well, often better served by the episodic sister medium of television. But guess what? The Brutalist has one of those too! So the creative decision to include an overture when you already had an opening credits scroll is what I can only assume to be a symptom of having your head so far up your own ass that you can taste trachea. As for the intermission, I don't even know what to say. That's not so much a filmmaking faux pas as it is a cry for help. If you think your movie needs an intermission, what you really need is an intervention. Is it just me? Am I so out of touch? Or has there been this bizarre trend lately for these Oscar bait movies to pad their films with ruinous amounts of useless bloat? Do they think that the Academy is weighing their contenders per pound or something? In the time that it took me to write and produce this video, I was able to gather objective evidence on just how pretentious these assholes are because they kept the intermission in the Blu-ray and streaming releases, even though the audience definitionally comes equipped with a fast forward and pause button. However, much as I'm loath to admit it, given my anaphylactic reaction to this trend, the Brutalist actually does move at a pretty decent clip. Compared to something like Oppenheimer, which is a super solid 80 minutes buried under almost 2 hours of gratuitous fat, or the obstinate meander of Killers of the Flower Moon, which I actually think would have worked better if it were even longer, but instead took the form of a 10-hour miniseries. That being if Lord Scorsese ever humbled himself off his high horse enough to join us here in the 21st century. The Brutalist is an interesting case study of what good structure can do for your pacing. The movie adequately plants and pays off its narrative elements to engagingly string one beat to the next, even despite its filmmakers' best efforts to drag those scenes into languid stagnation just for the sake of clout. The other non-partisan criticism I want to address, I think I'll have to call it comprehensibility? Not so much the abstract or metaphorical symbolism of the film, although put a pin in that too. I mean more in the technical and literal sense. More simply, the audio mixing sucks. Straight up unintelligible at point. The nadir being anytime Felicity Jones does her half-whisper through a bedsheet act. Normally, if I'm hitting the cinema to catch up on Oscar baiters and one of them thinks they're just too artistic to have to deal with the audio part of the audio-visual medium, what are you? I'll merely lament that there's no closed captions menu for movie theaters. Except in this case, there were closed captions, but it was, no hyperbole, the single most frustrating time I've ever had trying to read subtitles in my life. The theater had set up these guardrails at each level of the stadium seating, the bar of which was expertly positioned to block off the precise section of screen where the Brutalist had its frequent but sporadic translations. And even if you did scrunch down or crane up to read them, somehow we must have been shipped the amateur hour fan sub that forgot to add black outlines around the letters, rendering them effectively illegible in many scenes.
You cannot have yellow text on a white background. How do you not know this?
I must concede that I have no evidence that either of these issues exist in any other locations. But man, did it degrade the already not very cool viewing experience I was having. I'm done. I pick at these nits any harder, I'm going to start ripping skin. The last point to make on the subject of comprehensibility regards abstraction and allegory. Who left all these pins lying around? The raves on this film have all pithed out some poster quotes in the ballpark of a harrowing and deeply personal chronicle of the immigrant's tale and the dark side of the American dream. Which is one of those moments that made me question if we were watching the same movie, because that is not the fuck what this movie is about. America is never enshrined as a bastion of salvation from the terrors of Europe, only later then to be uncovered as a false idol. The Thoth's layover in the US reads much more as incidental than intentional. They're to demonstrate America as a slimy, gross, exploitative place, and therefore motivation for them to make Alia as their obligation. The Brutalist is an extremely grounded picture, only ever seeming to dip its toes into the realm of allegory at the end of the third act, when Van Buren, after having been named and shamed, vanishes into the night, his only ethereal remnant, the moonlight pouring in through the chapel's carved portcullis, shaped into a cross, illuminating the marble pulpit. Here the film especially invites us to read its characters in the moonlight of symbology, similar to the way that The Dark Knight very obviously codes its characters as stand-ins for larger ideologies, i.e. radical anarchism, the political justice system, or the liberal capitalist fantasy of the good billionaire. The Brutalist also uses its ensemble as proxy for various geopolitical rhetorics. Rereading this scene, it is insultingly obvious that the Van Burens represent the oligarchic old money American demagoguery and are... That might seem shallow, but if we sub out this American royal family for the systemic gristlemel that exploitatively chews through the labor of desperate immigrants comfortably numbed up on the opioid of the American dream, yeah, that works. Best point that the film makes. Even if Fievel beat them to it by almost 40 years, still always a good message. To the Brutalist's credit, it does make the most of its more adult tone by making its allegories unrelentingly direct. That very bad thing that Van Buren does to Laszlo, a harrowing effigy to how America treated and treats its alien citizens. Hell, the anti-Americanism even makes Laszlo a slightly less deplorable husband by recontextualizing the beat at the brothel. If we substitute the human woman with the other most recent female figure visually depicted in the film, the Statue of Liberty, The new Colossus twists and shifts from a sincere sonnet sung out across the world to a wicked siren song, luring in the huddled masses to ruin. But to reiterate, that is not what the Brutalist is actually about. I first felt something might be off with that one radio broadcast announcement about the birth of Israel. Okay, maybe it's just set dressing, I thought to myself. The broadcast establishes the time period, and our protagonist is Jewish, so that's fine. I've been saying for years now that due to the delays from COVID and the writers' strike, go SAG-AFTRA, the film industry will be dusting off shelved projects for a while to come. Maybe this is just poor timing. It is not. The true agenda, what The Brutalist is really about, is irrefutably to exalt the state of Israel as a universal good while omitting the displacement of Palestinian people or even their existence. Just like Gone with the Wind and Birth of a Nation before it, The Brutalist serves as filmic supremacist propaganda, only now post-lapsarian of World War II rather than antebellum. Earlier, when I referred to the truth that Erzsébet spoke to Van Buren, we decipher him as a microcosm of the American plutocracy. But then, that begs the question, what is she? As briefly mentioned, Erzsébet is a writer by trade, specifically a journalist, but she wasn't always a lifestyle columnist, nor is it even a discipline she ever aspired to. We're told that prior to her captivity in Dachau, Erzsébet used to be an investigative journalist writing important pieces, and that she could be again. If only she were to accompany Zafia in immigrating to Israel. There's really no other way to interpret Erzsébet's role in the narrative than as a personification of the Israeli media institution, which was the tipping point for me when The Brutalist went from just being a frustrating movie that was also maybe a little tone-deaf to outright revisionist history. Making a film in 2024 that subtextually venerates pro-Israeli press as a bastion of truth is, to put it mildly, fucking gross. Rest assured, that is exactly what's happening here. Otherwise, why would the film contrive to let Erzsébet have the ultimate castigation of Van Buren and not Laszlo, the actual victim? Lest you think this is all conspiratorial babbling, let's lay out some sources. The Guardian reported that Israeli groups used open AI tools to spread disinformation. PolitiFact chronicles several vectors of misinformation, including claims of crisis actors to downplay war casualties, reaching as far as Newsmax accusing one man hauling patients through a bombed-out hospital of using fake blood.
Oh, with fake blood on his hands. It's this guy right here. Does MSNBC not pay attention to anything? This guy's everywhere. He's a crisis actor. He's at every possible crisis they have. He gets paid by Hamas, and MSNBC puts him on TV.
Even the ADL chewed out the Jerusalem Post for publishing an article claiming that a dead Palestinian baby was, quote, only a doll. The New York Times instructed its journalists covering the Israel war on Gaza Strip to restrict the use of terms genocide and ethnic cleansing, and to avoid using the phrase occupied territory when describing Palestinian land, according to a copy of an internal memo obtained by The Intercept. I'm restricting this bibliography to only established news sources, despite the avalanche of misinformation that's come out over social media sites on this particular topic, and the Pew Research Center reporting that 54% of U.S. adults at least sometimes get their news from social media, regardless of its veracity, because I really want to drive home the point that in any conflict zone, information is always hard to come by, usually murky, and even sometimes deadly. There are good journalists doing important work in Gaza, including those that do work for Israeli-owned news outlets. And there's also been a disgusting amount of lies slung at the machinations of Israel in specific and the Jewish people as a whole, which is why context is so important. Because taking into consideration how dogmatically pro-Israel the rest of the Brutalist is, having its second most saintly character in the cast be a professional truth teller has the unmistakable whiff of just trust me bro credibility. I cannot state strongly enough, I vehemently reject in all its forms the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that a Jewish cabal is controlling media. In fact, let's just go ahead and get all the disclaimers out of the way right now. Let me be very, very explicitly clear. My critique is of the actions of the Israeli government and their enablers like the United States of America. I do not extend that culpability to all Jewish people, nor even to the majority of the Israeli citizenry. They are not a monolith, and there are many Jewish people inside of Israel and out who are abhorred by the actions of the Israeli government. I unequivocally condemn Hamas for the terrorist attack of October 7th, 2023 as an atrocity. The murder of those 1,200 Israelis can never be justified. And for the same reason, nor does that attack justify the genocidal campaign that the Israeli Defense Force has waged on the people of Palestine in retribution. According to Reuters, at the start of this year, the IDF has slaughtered at least 46,600 Palestinian people. If God promised the Israelites that any sin they committed against the covenant would be avenged by sevenfold, then the IDF has exceeded even his wrath by a factor of more than 5. Do the Jewish people deserve a homeland? As long as their species is using nation states, then absolutely, especially if it allows them to live free from persecution. But freedom from persecution does not mean freedom to persecute others. And the history of Israel has been rife with the exact xenophobic persecution from as far back as its inception. The Middle Eastern lands for Israel were seized during the 1948 expulsion of more than 700,000 Palestinians, known as the Nakba, a catastrophe happening just concurrent to the events of The Brutalist. You can tell the movie is aware of this in how it frames Palestine. It doesn't. Not a single line in the script even mentions the country or the people. This is most evident in that conversation when Zafia, positioned as cloyingly chaste cherub of the picture, announces her making Aliyah, phrased as going home. Hey, movie! I think that was already somebody's home! You want to mention that? No? This is also the scene where the film voices its sharpest, harshest, and only rebuke of the Israeli state, that it is hard living. Biting. Speaking of biting, the more I sat with this undercurrent, the more I recognized its fetid waters seeping into the roots of even what I'd considered the film's most poignant commentary. As I mulled over the role of the Van Burens, again, something started to dawn on me. The Brutalist's illumination of the American dream as clandestine nightmare is actually a way to exonerate the ruling Western nation's abdication of any caretaking responsibility for the survivors of the Holocaust by way of incompetence. After the inciting Hamas war crimes and ensuing massacre, I really took the time to dig into the backstory of the decades-long conflict in Gaza. And research rapidly metamorphosed my position from, I do not know enough about this situation and will therefore refrain from opining, to, this is actually kind of fucked. And one of those kind of fucky fulcrums was where the newly cemented post-World War II superpowers opted to plonk down the Jewish sanctuary. There are a lot of dumb answers to the question of why couldn't the US just carve out a swath of their enormous landmass to become Israel? And of those, the Brutalist answers, well, because America is corrupt, cruel, manipulative, and abusive. Which is true, but it then also posits that rather than the panacea being a cultural melting pot and government support with an active push to quash anti-Semitism, or at least making the 51st state of Israel able to act autonomously within the parameters of keeping its own people safe, the real answer is instead to go halfway across the planet and bulldoze these unrelated people out of their homes. Which brings us all the way back around to our protagonist himself, Laszlo Thoth. We've already covered several ways that Thoth's character is utilized to further the film's agenda, but I'm harrowed most by its fixation on his profession. Laszlo being a maestro architect isn't an incidental background detail, it's the thing propelling the entire A-plot. It is the beating heart of both the narrative and the revisionism. See, Laszlo ain't out here demolishing occupied buildings, driving the tenants from their homes in order to blank a canvas for his own magnum opus, even though callously evicting the downtrodden for personal gain would be right in line with Van Buren's boundless greed. Maybe the film could then be a parable about the seductive but ultimately corrupting relationship between art, commerce, and power. But no, and let me stress, not excursively no. Not, well, that's what I would have liked to see, but I didn't make the movie. No. Not, well, they thought of it, but it might have been a bad look. No. Deliberately, no. Pointedly, no. The whole fucking reason they made the movie, no. Laszlo Thoth's masterwork is constructed in a billionaire's functionally vacant backyard in a film otherwise laser-focused on championing the greatness of Israel because the Brutalists' objective is not merely to eschew mention of Palestine for fear of uncomfortable politics, but to obliterate even the thought of them from history. Cultivating something civilized out of the ostensibly barren landscape, all the while burying the reason that the land appears so uncultivated is due to them annihilating all the civilization that was already there, razing across land, paving in graves, and building over bodies. And some fucking how that is still not even the worst part. The worst part is the excuse the film tries to gaslight us with. The epilogue's sole purpose is to laboriously detail the reason for Thoth's virtuosity over edifice is because he designed them to evoke the oppression and despair that he felt inside the concentration camp. A trivial little detail on its own. Maybe a little patronizing by itself, showing a lack of trust in the audience to be able to read the film, but I have just spent the past 4,000 some odd words painstakingly trying to prove to you that this is not innocuous. This is a gambit to wager, if all else fails, the fathomless pathos of having survived the Holocaust as collateral for inflicting another Holocaust upon the planet. It is in this moment, as with so many other moments throughout human history, that we must remember Paulo Freire's staggering insight into the human condition. That when education is not liberating, it is the dream of the oppressed to become the oppressor. Said another way, it is the dream of the brutalized to become the brutalist. As we round the corner from envelope to Oscars, I feel a distinct lack of cultural heft to The Brutalist. Despite this being the first time in half a decade, it feels like it's worth pretending to at least care about the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. If ever even there was a time the iron was hot enough to strike, that period seems to have long since cooled. Most of the award season scuttlebutt has been circling the corpse of Emilia Perez. A conversation I feel I'd have extremely little to add even if the think piece market wasn't oversaturated. And I took so damn long in making this thing that I can now confirm that The Brutalist did not win the Academy Award for Best Picture. However, there is one much more important reason why The Brutalist's hyper-Zionism has been seemingly waning in recent discourse. On January 19th, 2025, Israel declared a ceasefire in Gaza, allowing thousands of Palestinians to return to the remnants of their homes and begin the process of digging through the rubble to find a chance at starting to heal, which is amazing, truly incredible. Please do not read even a grain of sarcasm into my elation. I could not possibly be more sincere. I stand by everything that I have said here, but in the face of ending a genocide, I couldn't give half a shit if this review isn't timely enough for the algorithm. A ceasefire to this conflict is more life-affirming than all the words I could ever say. Good fucking riddance to violence in Gaza. May peace forever keep this video irrelevant. Oh, hey, would you look at that? Relevance. Fucking bummer. Oh, and not that anyone asked, but I think the Academy totally nailed it. Nora would have been my film of the year, too. Beats the pants off the Brutalist just by actually doing something with its opening title sequence.